We now come to another video on a lecture on applied ethics concerning animal rights, and this has got to do with the experiments that we've been performing on animals under the name of or under the guise of discovering various kind of medicines, ways of experimentation which would help in designing certain methods whereby we can operate on humans, and that's what we are going to be explaining in this video regarding experiments on animals. Is it right to be experimenting on animals? Is it an exploitation of their rights again? So, we will see that how all of these aspects about animals are interconnected. I am Dr. Sudhnya N. Kulkarni, Associate Professor of Philosophy at Janki Devi Memorial College, University of Delhi, and this of course is a course which is under Applied Ethics, BAPY 101. History of animal testing. Now, whenever we talk about animal experiments or experiments on animal, we definitely have to go back and look into history of animal testing. When exactly is it that testing on animals started? And we do find that the history of animal testing dates back to the ancient world, with the earliest known animal surgery being performed on a cow between 3400 or 3000 BCE. In Greece and Rome, Aristotle as well as Aristaeus were among the first who went on to perform experiments on animals in the 2nd and the 4th century BCE. Galen, a Greek physician who practiced in Rome, conducted experiments to advance understanding of anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, was also known as the father of vivisection. In Moorish Spain, Ibn Zuhr introduced animal testing as a way to test surgical procedures before applying them to humans. During Renaissance, animal experiments were rediscovered in the 16th century. Andreas Vesalius, a Belgian physician, supplemented his teaching of human anatomy with animal dissections. So, we find that what exactly are we doing when we talk about animal testing? Well, animal testing is a scientific experiment or a test in which a live animal is forced to undergo something that is likely to cause them pain, suffering, distress or lasting harm. Animal experiments are those where animals are used in laboratories, definitely not for their own good, but for conducting experiments, and oftentimes it so happens that they usually killed or die at the end of the experiment. Animal experiments include injecting or force feeding animals with potentially harmful substances, surgically removing certain organs or tissues to deliberately cause damage to them, forcing animals to inhale toxic gases, subjecting animals to frightening situations to create anxiety and depression. Some experiments also require the animal to die as part of the test. All of these experiments are somehow used, done, conducted on animals to see how they react, and based on their reactions, these experiments lead to certain development of drugs which would then be used on humans or would go on to benefit humans. A large number of animals are used for experimentation, and at times there are labs where they are grown so that continuous experimentation on them can go on unhindered. Animals used in experiments are usually sometimes bred for this purpose by the lab or even in breeding facilities. It is a cruel multi-million-dollar industry which continues to thrive even in the 21st century. Horses and other animals such as cows, sheep, pigs are often supplied by dealers to be used for experiments or trial of new drugs. Even dogs and cats are not spared from brutal experiments, even though they are regarded as companions by humans. Wild animals too are used for experiments, and oftentimes they are either forcibly trapped or monitored, euthanized, and sometimes they are captured and brought into laboratories for more invasive research. Over the 17th century, animal experiments have gone on to prove to be more informative and relevant in obtaining scientifically sound knowledge. However, the moral acceptability of inducing suffering in animals in the name of scientific advancement also has gone on to become a huge issue. Many have opposed the use of vivisection, and they did that before the end of the 17th century. Yet even those who acknowledged that animals suffered through experiments nevertheless went on to defend their experiments and said, well, no doubt we are causing cruelty to animals, but somehow all this suffering of animals is justified because it is being done for the sake of mankind. Scientists such as Stephen Hales was the first one who went on to measure pressure in the blood vessels and contributed significant advancements in the understanding of cardiovascular as well as respiratory physiology. Albrecht von Haller is also known for his work on inflammation, neurophysiology, heart function, hemodynamics. Both of them carried out their experiments on animals, and they both defended it under the title of progress in science. And many a time some of these experiments that they carried on were extremely cruel, traumatic for the animals, but well, they were not bothered about that aspect of their experimentation, but rather about developing and progressing science, and thus went on to defend all those experiments that they carried out on animals. It is common knowledge that both these researchers were disgusted sometimes by the gruesomeness of their own experiments, and they did talk about whether they were morally justified in conducting those experiments. But like I said, they carried on with their experimentation by using sometimes live animals to comprehend and understand certain basic physiological processes which were far from being understood. The very concept or the very idea that someone is experimenting on live animals is abhorrent, and what can one talk about protecting their rights. While the second half of the 19th century marked the beginning of scientifically meaningful and medically relevant animal research, this period also saw opposition to vivisection, and slowly it became widespread in England. However, the opposition to vivisection was building in England, but the same was not the case in France and Germany. With the discovery of anesthetic, which allowed for experiments on animals to continue with less guilt. Why? Because animals could be anesthetized and pain would get reduced and animals could be experimented on, and this became a routine matter in the 1840s. The experiments that were carried out on animals has no doubt led to the discovery as well as invention of many drugs, methods of treatment, but there are some scientists who have argued that animals do not share the same type of physiology as we humans, and probably it may not be a right way to develop drugs or treatment methods that we are then going to use on humans. The next topic that we are going to talk about is challenges to animal testing. Jeremy Bentham is often considered a pioneer of animal rights, but his views on the subject are more nuanced than is commonly thought. We all know about Jeremy Bentham as utilitarian philosopher, the founder of utilitarian philosophy, talking about maximum happiness of maximum number of people, the greatest happiness principle, but somewhere in all of this, and of course someone who also proposed about legal reforms in England at that point of time, why he felt that codification of law was necessary and required, and sometimes he was against the English common law. He was one of the first Western philosophers to argue that animals should be given equal moral consideration, and he believed that an animal's sentience was the only important factor when it came to determining whether it should be protected or unnecessary pain. So, the fact that an animal is sentient, the fact that an animal is conscious, according to Bentham, was important enough, was complete in itself to ensure or guarantee that the animal needed to be protected from unnecessary pain. Bentham argues that it is not easy to justify inflicting suffering on sentient non-human animals than it is to justify inflicting suffering on humans. If you try to think of some reason that inflicting pain on humans is somehow worse than inflicting pain on non-humans, he claims that no reason can be given. Bentham rejected arguments that reasoned that human beings were more valuable simply because they were rational. So, we will find that Bentham in fact is rejecting arguments that have been given regarding speciesism, regarding personhood, regarding human exceptionalism, be it Kant, be it Peter Carather, be it Descartes, be it Aristotle, be it St. Augustine, be it St. Thomas Aquinas, all those who have gone on about rationality, who have gone on to talk about rationality, reasoning, the capacity of human beings to think, act, be conscious, take decisions as per their rationality, and this aspect that we are able to transfer what we are thinking into human actions, choices, makes us superior beings, us arguments that Bentham has gone on to reject. Bentham in fact noted that a fully grown horse or a dog is beyond comparison a more rational as well as more conversable animal than an infant of a day or a week or even a month old. Bentham argued that when it came to suffering, both rationality as well as the fact that we have language, we are able to communicate with each other, are irrelevant as reasons. It is a fact, and it is a known fact, that animals too communicate with each other. The only thing is that we are not able to comprehend the language in which they are communicating, just as they are not able to understand the language in which we are communicating. There are studies that have shown that animals are petrified of one voice, and that is the human voice. So, Bentham was probably right when he said that rationality and language are irrelevant as reasons when we are affording or when we are according higher status to humans and saying that yes, it is right to be experimenting on animals, because after all it is for the welfare or the benefit of human beings. He stated, suppose the case were otherwise. He says, and human infants were more rational than adult horses or dogs. Still, he said, this would have no relevance to justifying the infliction of pain. Why? Because when asking whether it is morally acceptable to cause pain to someone, human or non-human, the question is not can they reason, nor can they talk, but can they suffer? And the fact that animals too suffer because they are sentient conscious beings is enough to show that we have no rights to be exploiting them. According to Bentham, difference in species like difference in skin color is also not morally relevant. What matters is whether the individual can suffer. As he puts it, the French have already discovered that the blackness of the skin is no reason why a human being should be abandoned without redress to the caprice of a tormentor. The same is true of the number of legs. Bentham's views about suffering come from his ethical theory, that is utilitarianism. Bentham is known as the founder of utilitarianism, especially hedonistic utilitarianism, which says pleasure is the only thing that is good and pain is the only thing that is bad. According to utilitarians like Bentham, we should do whatever causes the greatest balance of pleasure over pain for all sentient creatures. According to Bentham, it is bad to cause unjustified suffering, no matter how rational or talkative the sufferer is. A dog, a horse and a human can all suffer. So, according to Bentham's utilitarianism, the suffering of a dog or a horse matters just as much as the suffering of a human. Bentham's utilitarianism was as radical in his day as it is today. It led Bentham to oppose slavery as well as sexism at a time when race-based slavery was legal in England and women in England were denied equal status to men. Now we look at steps that have been taken to minimize animal testing. Animal rights advocates and members of the scientific community have pushed in recent times for the use of alternatives to animal experimentation. The pursuit of animal alternatives has largely centered on concepts that were first introduced in 1959 by British zoologists W. M. S. Russell and R. L. Birch in the Principles of Humane Experimental Technique. The very title, the Principles of Humane Experimental Technique, talks about how we should look at conducting experiments or techniques on animals that are humane in their perspective. Russell and Birch framed their proposal around 3 R's. They suggested that experimentation should replace animal subjects with something else, something which is non-sentient material or less sentient animals. That of course is questionable. Reduce the number of animal subjects used experimentally while increasing the amount of data that is being obtained. And the third R is refine living conditions and experiment procedures for animal subjects, thereby to try and reduce their pain and discomfort. Several alternatives to animal testing are available or can be designed. Some of them are in vitro, testing cells and tissues outside of the body in a lab setting such as in a petri dish or test tube. In silico, using computer models and other computational methods to predict the effects of substances. In chemico, testing biological molecules such as DNA and proteins. Organ on a chip, a 3D tissue culture that mimics the physiological aspects of an organ or tissue. Human volunteers, using human volunteers in clinical research. Human tissues and cells, using human tissues and cells in research. Established cell lines, using established cell lines in research. Non-invasive diagnostic images, where you are using non-invasive diagnostic imaging techniques. Trauma Man, a system that replicates a human torso and is also used to teach emergency surgical procedures. Simple organisms, using simple organisms such as bacteria to study basic bioprocesses. Thus, we find that all of these techniques, in vitro, in silico, in chemico, organ on a chip, human volunteers, human tissues and cells, established cell lines, non-invasive diagnostic images, Trauma Man, simple organism are some of the techniques that have been developed recently by thinkers, by scientists, where they are talking about how we should look at replacing animal subjects, reducing their number on which animal subjects on which experiments are conducted, and somewhere go about refining their living conditions and experimental procedures, so that we can go on doing our research, but with less adverse impact on animals. Over the last decade, improved technological capabilities have enabled scientists to reduce their reliance on animal models for specific types of studies. These advances are important. And why are they important? Because testing in animals can pose ethical issues, take significant time and resources, and sometimes the question arises, is it actually relevant to human health? That is something which is not clear. Recent advances in alternative methods such as computational, biochemical, cell-based model systems have all shown that these tests in some cases do perform the same as or even better than standard animal models. These new approach methodologies, or NAMs as they are called, sometimes called novel alternative methods, non-animal methods, or even new alternative methods, all provide a complementary approach to traditional models. Alternative methods such as those mentioned in the earlier slides could provide more rapid and human relevant techniques to assess chemical safety for diverse communities that are affected by environmental exposures. Alternatives to animal testing can be used for toxicological research such as chemical safety and drug effectiveness testing, or other types of biomedical research that examine biological mechanisms of disease. As different human populations experience different levels of susceptibility to toxic effects from chemical exposure, alternative methods of experimentation would go a long way in understanding and addressing these challenges. The scientific advancements have paved the way for alternative methods that are not only more humane, but also more reliable and relevant to human biology. Techniques such as in vitro testing, computer modeling and the use of human cell cultures have gone on to prove to be effective substitutes for animal experiments. India too has taken some steps to regulate animal testing, but of course there is still a lot of work to be done. In 2014, India became the first country in Asia to ban the testing of cosmetics on animals and the import of cosmetics tested on animals. In 2013, Medical Education India amended regulations to ban the use of live animals on which experiments were conducted in medical education. In 2013, India also made it illegal to use captive dolphins for public entertainment. An amendment to the new Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2023, which has recently been passed by the Government of India, aims to replace the use of animals in research, especially in drug testing. The amendment authorizes researchers to instead use non-animal and human relevant methods, including technologies like 3D organoids, organs on chip and advanced computational methods to test the safety and efficacy of new drugs. In conclusion, we can say and state that countries along with organizations like PETA, Humane International among others have worked towards creation of awareness of how to stop animals from being used in testing. Complete elimination is still far away, but steps are definitely being taken to minimize the use of animals in conducting experiments. Animal testing should be eliminated. Why? Because it violates animals' rights. It causes pain and suffering to the experimental animals, and other means of testing product toxicity are available. Thank you.